Hi, this is Daniel Cremin, host of Cremin's Corner, and I'm just going to give you my take on the issue of public trust and public accountability and where things sort of stand at the moment. Obviously, those who've been sort of following the recent cut and thrust of UK politics will be aware that the Peter Mandelson Epstein saga kind of continues to sort of canter on as a predominant issue of focus in Westminster at the moment, and squarely the kind of focus on what Keir Starmer and his senior aides knew, when they knew, and what sort of communications they had with Peter Mandelson during the sort of run up to his formal appointment as the British ambassador to the USA, um, and how that appointment was handled. Now, look, what's been sort of emerging is a sort of a pattern of unconventional behaviour, to say the least, on the part of the people around the Prime Minister who he entrusted with the job of asking these questions. He made a rather fateful decision to sort of leave the vetting process effectively to some of his closest political aides, who were the closest people to Peter Mandelson, people who'd worked with him for many years, who'd been sort of inspired by him, mentored by him. He left all of it to them. Clearly, I mean, now he's saying, "Look, I had reservations about the appointment, and I wanted to ensure due diligence was done, and I trusted the wrong people." I think that's baloney. To use the American pun there for it. Ultimately, he wanted this guy in because he felt. I mean, to be honest with you, I still don't quite understand the full reasoning for why he wanted Mandelson in, other than that Mandelson himself wanted the gig. But he wanted him in. We'll accept that. There may have been a number of reasons why, but what he did was he entrusted people like Morgan McSweeney, who was his former chief of staff and a senior political aide, to kind of ask a series of questions. Now, what Morgan McSweeney has claimed is that his phone was stolen about a month or so after Peter Mandelson resigned, or not resigned, was sacked, now they say, as US ambassador, and that this followed internal strategy sessions where they were talking about how would they manage the communications issues around the vetting of the Peter Mandelson appointment if all of this sort of picked up. So about a month after, the phone was apparently stolen. And there's this whole furore about how he reported it, and that this is a government phone, government issued phone for the chief of staff to the Prime Minister, and that he rang the police and got a recorded crime number. And there's a sort of a transcript of the call that's been sort of released that, a lot of people are saying looks a little bit flaky. Now, look, I'm not going to make any comments about the veracity of what he was doing. That's not my space. That's other journalists, people with a lot deeper pockets, can make those kind of claims and insinuations if they want to. I'm not going to say anything about that. What I'm going to say something about, though, is the public reaction to all of this. I think it's really damaging trust in politics and in the government, but in the political class as a whole, it's all quite corrosive. And one of the things that's most striking for me was GB News sort of broke with another story kind of related to this, which is, even if the phone hadn't been stolen or lost, however you want to sort of view it, even if the phone hasn't disappeared, if it hadn't been stolen, it would have auto deleted anyway, because the phones now, the Whitehall setup is to have the auto delete functionality enabled for messages on WhatsApp. Now, the Cabinet Office, of course, do have some guidance to civil servants and to advisors that says, nothing you should do with your phone should conflict your official duty to keep records of anything that is salient to decision making, to keep official records. It's a rather tidy arrangement in practice, because they're not going to do that, are they? They're not going to be routinely backing up the messages on WhatsApp. We all know that they have the auto delete on because in the wake of the whole COVID files, the lockdown files and revelations in the Telegraph, that's where the sort of the mass release of a whole range of, rather damaging WhatsApp messages between Matt Hancock, Michael Gove, and a whole host of other characters in the civil service, in the scientific advisory establishment, and in the government, amongst ministers. None of it looked very good. And in the aftermath of that, particularly I think under Rishi Sunak and now under Keir Starmer, a decision was taken to clearly sort of change the way they communicate and to move to auto delete. And it doesn't inspire confidence, does it, that they're going to be open and in the style of decision making. I'm sure people have seen some of these screenshots in the past of how they communicate, how the kind of the jocularity around rather serious issues that's going on in these WhatsApp groups. The lack of seriousness to a lot of it. And you see that as well with some of the things like the Wes Streeting and Peter Mandelson sort of back and forth over WhatsApp. It doesn't smack of a particularly professionalized approach to policy making and of the influencing that's going on. None of it reflects particularly well. But I think this auto delete issue, it does not inspire public trust. And why I'm bringing all of this up is because I think what reform is trying to get back to is, and I've really been struck by this by some of the kind of remarks Zia Youssef has been sort of making in recent interviews, is much more about, look, we're going to be an elected government where ministers decide and take responsibility, and the civil service is engineered, it's going to be re-engineered to deliver ministerial priorities of an elected government. And he wants to do away with this kind of endless litany of quangos and special advisors and czars kind of in the mix and have a much more functionally aligned kind of political and policy making infrastructure, particularly for the Home Office, but I think this is more broadly for reform, whereby what the government wants to deliver will be delivered. And I think that's so important. I think we need to get back to that. Rather than having all these spinning plates of lots of different players kind of in the background, all briefing against each other, all sort of conniving. We need to get back to old-fashioned ministerial direct responsibility and accountability when things seriously go wrong. Because at the moment, and there's just, personally, I think we need to get away from government by WhatsApp in the same way that we needed to kind of get away from government on the sofa. The sort of Tony Blair era of lots of unrecorded sessions of senior ministers, lots of decisions really not being taken through cabinet committees and minuted at all. We're now in the sort of era of auto delete WhatsApp. Although, are we? Again, people would say, how is it that the Peter Mandelson exchanges with Wes Streeting can be released if it's all set to auto delete? So they're either telling the truth or they're not on the whole sort of auto deletion of government messages now via WhatsApp and other secure services, or they're not. But none of it striking me as being particularly conducive to trust in politics. And that core theme of accountability, I think we just have to get back to it. I think a lot more needs to be on the record about what's being decided and why. I think we need to really reinvigorate cabinet committees. And one of the things we've talked about reform is a strengthened role for parliamentary select committees. And I think that's absolutely essential. I think one of the weakest features of our democracy relative to the US and the Canadian system is the sort of paucity, really, of accountability mechanisms for senior civil servants, for quangocrats, and for ministers to be sort of held to account on the outcomes that they said they'll be delivering. So one of the things I would like to see reform do in the interest of the health of British democracy is strengthen the select committee system when it gets in. And that's one of the ways that they say that they will be able to ensure that members of the House of Lords who are appointed as ministers, the upper chamber that reform plans to fill with some of the technocratic ministers, they'll be held to account through select committees because they can't appear in the chamber and routinely ask questions. But that strengthened role for select committees might be one of the remedies to this. But look, trust is rock bottom right now, and we have to look at that. It's not conducive to the public well-being for the public to have this little trust in our politicians and civil servants. We've got to do something to turn that around. So yeah, those are just my thoughts, and I hope you enjoy it. Please do share the video and do check out the channel. Thanks very much. Bye bye.